Welcome to Gray Maybe, a limited series podcast and social experiment based on this season's topic, grief. My name is Jillian Schmitz. I'm a professional dancer, actor, teacher, author, artist, and cat lover. Through my own personal journey of recovery, I found that things aren't just black or white, or a simple yes or no. For me, in my recovery, there has been mostly gray area and a lot of maybes. In most of my stories, you can find the gray maybe. I'll be sharing my own process through personal stories and interviews with others in an effort to help investigate the process of and recovery through grief. If you'd like to share your story, please email graymaybestories@gmail.com. graymaybestories@gmail.com. Before we get started, if you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're using to catch future episodes of Gray Maybe. A note before we start. My stories and the stories of others on this podcast are told through the lens of our own experience. The revelation of our process is ours to tell. If you disagree with the views or stories on this podcast, know that we are not speaking on anything other than our own experiences and viewpoints. Take what you like and leave the rest. Nothing expressed or mentioned in this podcast is an endorsement or is meant to be taken as advice. It is strictly the sharing of our own experiences and recovery. Any feelings this podcast activates in the listener is for the listener to process and recover from. Any criticism you have based on these experiences and choices are yours, and they are not anyone else's burden to carry. Trigger warning: death, grief, suicide, child loss, burials, cremations, and cadavers. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Gray Maybe. If you're new to the podcast, I'm so glad you're tuning in to today's episode. If you have been listening all along, I really appreciate you coming back and listening again. It has meant the world to me that people are listening and keep coming back again and again. So we are getting towards the end of this season, the third season of Gray Maybe, and the topic is grief. And I have a very special guest who came as a surprise. So most of the time when I'm getting guests for this podcast, it's usually I'm reaching into my friends and family, my recovery areas, just people that I know for the most part. And that's how I've kind of sourced my guests. But this guest is someone that came through someone else. It's a person I've had on the podcast multiple times, Melissa Adelia Calisans, who's been an avid listener of the podcast. She has been so supportive of my podcast and so incredibly complimentary, which has been so lovely to hear as a podcast person host thing, because you kind of are in a void when you're making podcasts and you don't know if anybody's really listening unless someone says, hey, I listened to that thing and it was great. And Melissa does that a lot. But when Melissa was on this last time for this season, she had mentioned a podcast called Let's Talk About Death. And the Let's Talk About Death podcast is with two men that are brothers, Benny and Dr. Nick. And she had mentioned this podcast, and I said, great, I'm going to give it a listen. I'm going to add it in the show notes. And I did listen to some of the episodes. Really cool, really great, lovely backstory. And then Benny from the Let's Talk About Death podcast reached out to me and was like, hey, I listened to the podcast. Let's collab. So today I have Benny from the Let's Talk About Death podcast on the pod, and I'll say a couple things about him, but he can probably tell us even more. He grew up in a funeral household, like a family who does funerals, like that's their business, and it's a fourth generation business. He's from the Midwest, and I believe he's a father. He can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's a father. And he also has some other fun things. He has a YouTube where he interviews local entrepreneurs, and he's also in a band, a very cool ska punk band called The Boy Detective. So he may talk about all those things. But before I blab even more about Benny, welcome to the podcast, and add whatever you want to add.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is exciting. This is wonderful. Anytime I can talk about grief is just absolutely, so great.
You
So
are
just
alone in that. You are alone in that.
you're alone about talking about grief?
Yes, yes,
Oh,
yes.
no,
That's why your
no,
podcast
no.
is so popular and good, is
Oh,
because people don't talk about it. They don't want to
I
talk about it.
love talking about death, but you're absolutely right. I
Yeah.
always joke about, man, it'd be nice if someday we're talking about, man, maybe people should start talking about living instead of death, like the flip it, like the,
Hmm.
the underworld or whatever. But yeah, so a little bit about me. So I am Benny Capaul. I'm fourth generation funeral director, which means dad was a funeral director, grandpa was a funeral director, and great grandpa was a funeral director. We've been in the same small town. I don't mind saying it's Ida, Michigan. So it's a little cold here, but we've been in this town for over 85 years. I think it's 87 or 88 this year. So we're getting close to our
Wow.
centennial, which is absolutely wonderful in this awesome community. Very small town. So think of like Norman Rockwell or Rockwell. Did I just?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
here
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
go. We got it. We got it, baby. Small town. Like I said, I have the privilege and honor of serving multiple families, but almost the same family, because just like all these small towns, we're somehow all related, weirdly enough.
Hmm.
I'm in a band called The Boy Detective, which is a ska punk band. Check it out. It's absolutely wonderful. We actually some of our songs are about existentialism, which is absolutely wonderful. And
That's
talk
my
about
favorite
grief.
everyday way of living life.
There you go. There you go. So listen that up. I have a YouTube called Capaul's Corner if you want to check that out. I help out local entrepreneurs and just kind of get people's businesses and their own selves out there to the world and community. And then also, most importantly, I've been married and happily married now for 10 years to a beautiful high school sweetheart that I met in high school. I might talk about her a little bit because in our beginning of our relationship, she lost her father to suicide. So that
Mm-hmm.
kind of started a lot of my personal life with her. And then we also have two beautiful children, a daughter Veda and a son Roman, and I'm very excited to be their dad. So and that was a whole different experience when it comes to grief in life when you become a parent on top of everything else. But I am a funeral director. What does that mean to you? I like to say funeral professional because funeral directing is only half of what I do. I also do embalming in the state of Michigan. What does that look for in education? Sorry if I'm going a little much, but
No,
I know a lot of
no,
people are
we
very
want to know all
interested
of
in
it.
what this is. In Michigan, that is a bachelor's degree from an accredited mortuary science school. For me, it was Wayne State University. It's really the only school in Michigan. I got my bachelor's through there and then had to pass these two national exams, one in science and one in arts. And then after that, I had to pass a state exam. So if you think about it, it's really the only bachelor's degree where I had to take two national tests and a state exam, which I think is very much needed in this profession
Hmm.
because there's a lot to this profession. There's a lot of hats that I have to wear. And I'm just honored to be talking about death. So let's do that, Jillian, because it's more
Yeah.
important than hearing about
No,
what I do and when
no. I think
all
it's,
that.
but I think your profession is very interesting. I think that's why we talked a little bit before we officially started recording, and we talked a little bit because I said I really was a big fan of the show 6 Feet Under, and it just came back to Netflix, and you were like, yep, yep, and then you had mentioned My Girl, the movie, which I also am very familiar with growing up, and the lead character Veda, which is now your daughter's name, and like those, I think there's something very interesting and secret about that, but things people want to know, like mysterious, right? Like things that people are maybe uncomfortable with, but they're interested or curious about how that all goes down.
Well,
So I
and
think it's like, yeah.
that's the beauty, Jillian, about death, right? That's why that's why we have death anxiety, is because we don't know what's after, right? That's the big
Hmm.
thing, right? And then, going back to My Girl, comparably to 6 Feet Over, or 6 Feet Under.
Hmm.
6 Feet Over is another. Oh, I want to talk about the nonprofits that I'm a part of, too, because
Yes,
they're absolutely
please.
wonderful. I'm part of 6 Feet Over, which is a suicide nonprofit that helps families financially and spiritually, financially, and also emotionally with the loss to suicide.
Amazing.
Also, I help out with another nonprofit called Gabby's Grief Center. It's based out of Monroe County, and it helps all sorts of different grief with our community. So I've been beneficial to do that. And it helps me learn and be a better funeral professional. But going back to 6 Feet Under, it's actually a wonderful show in the fact that I love the emotional connection between the family. Claire, David, and I can't remember the other character's name, but they're absolutely wonderful. And I love that they all have like their own little lives and have their own little secrets. But at the end of the day, the funeral home is the main focal point of their lives, which any funeral director out there, especially if you're in a local town, can understand and appreciate how a lot of the funeral directors the old code was you were married to this business because you spend a lot of time away from your family helping out other families. So I do love there's things about that obviously are very Hollywood-esque. Claire bringing in a foot to school would never happen in a funeral home.
Of course.
Well, I thought a lot growing up that people just knew certain things. And what I find is the media in Hollywood really, for some people, is the only education they have for something. So, yes, we do not take dead people's feet to school and let our children do that. If that would happen, A, there would be a lawsuit.
Now,
and B,
you did say that some states are a little more lax on the...
Well, you did bring up a good point.
You had mentioned that Michigan is very strict about the amount of education and the licensing and stuff that has to go on for you to be in this business, where in other states, it could be very lax. Someone could be bringing in a foot. I still doubt it, but...
But yeah, we were talking about My Girl. I loved My Girl because it reminded me so much of the feeling of what a funeral home actually looks like. It's interesting when I say funeral home or when I say funeral, the big word that comes to everybody's mind is funeral. But they forget that there's a second word to a funeral home. And the second word is home. It's comfort. The idea that a funeral home became what it was because people didn't want to have the wakes in their homes anymore, right? So the funeral home became it. And when we first started 88 and 89 years ago, you could do things a little differently. And my great-grandma would actually serve dinner to the families that would come in for the wakes. Can't do that now with everything as sad as the world is. There's certain things that you can't do anymore. So... like we are an actual funeral home. Like I have lived with my twin above the funeral home. Now he lives there with the family. I live across the street. My older brother lives across the other way. So like, it's literally like a family barracks almost. And it's interesting because families will come in and they'll see my kids or they'll see my twin's kid, which by the way, Doc and I have that podcast, Let's Talk About Death. He's my actual identical twin, and he is a licensed psychologist that specializes in grief and loss. So
now, does he work in the family business as well, or he does that? He's like more of a silent partner, or is he like very focused only on the psychology aspect of his career?
So being a family member of a family-owned funeral home, you're always part of it.
You're like, it's a mob, like you're a gang. You're like, you can't get jumped out. Like you're only leaving by death.
So Doc actually does help out. So he'll run a funeral or help me, not run a funeral, but help me with a funeral, park cars, or go on a death call with me. He's not actually a licensed funeral director, and he's not actually meeting clients in the funeral home, but he is a part of this funeral home. Not to mention he's educating my dad and I in the funeral profession to help families with grief and aftercare and loss. But yes, so he is part of the funeral home. He is. He's just as much of a staple as me. We were always under the impression that anybody who works for you is just as important as anybody else because the job couldn't get done without everybody. But he is not a licensed funeral director. That's where I come in on that side, and he comes in on the psychology side. So that's absolutely important. We're kind of getting off tandem. I tend to do that, so I apologize.
It's not at all. No, nothing's really off limits. But I personally wanted to know that because I was listening to you guys' podcast, and I know he brings in, the psychological licensing specialty part of it, and I know you are more in the actual licensed funeral director situation. So I was just wondering if he was not at all involved in the business or if he was in some capacity. So that was actually my own personal wanting to know. Great. And so you have, like, if you ask anyone about, like, what was your first experience with death, or what do you first remember having grief and stuff like that, and those two things don't always have to go together. I think people grieve a lot of things, not just death. I think death is the most appropriate scenario that people are allowed or let themselves feel grief and like indulge in it, whereas I feel like everyday griefs people kind of gaslight themselves into not accepting or processing. But a lot of people can kind of, if they really think about it, can go back and be like, oh, this is the first person I knew that died, or my first experience with, being around a dead body or having that kind of a scenario. But you have to like really dig because you like grew up in it.
Correct.
So this is like, there is like, you have a unique experience because I would say the rest of us have a very aligned experience where you are kind of the exception to the rule of other people. So like when you think of that, it's got to feel much different than other people. Like there must just be not a desensitization in that you have a lack of empathy, but like there has to be a bit more of a less, I don't know, like trauma associated with it because it was kind of just a way of life that you were kind of brought up into.
It's tricky to explain because you have to come from an understanding that for Doc and I called my twin Nick Doc all the time, just so everybody kind of understands that. My older brother Chris and my other older brother David, we were playing, Doc and I would get in trouble because we were playing Nerf guns in the casket room.
Right.
We would be playing basketball or we would be rollerblading and a widow or widower would walk in,
Right, and you got to tone it down, like,
I mean, we were
respectful.
kids, so a lot of
Right.
times we didn't. And what I
Right.
found out, what's interesting about that? What I found out, and there's actually a really good book. I can't think, but he was a funeral director. Now he's not, and he was a generational funeral director on both sides. His mom was like literally both sides. Like he would go to family houses for Christmas and stuff, and they would be at different funeral homes. But anyways, his name is Caleb Wild, and he wrote a book, and what was interesting was he mentioned a part where he was doing an arrangement, and his kids came in with their Halloween costumes on, and he had this departure of, and he deals with kind of what I deal with, and what's that is this new school of funeral profession and the old school. The old school was you as a individual don't need to know what we do behind closed doors. We are the professionals. We are the ones that can handle this. We are going to take that off your shoulders. That was the old way of approaching it. Mm-hmm. Like I'm here for you when you need me, but I'm also like, I'm also just like, I'm going to take care of that burden of dealing with death that you don't have to deal with. What I found out is no, people crave to find out what funeral directors do. Like call it taboo, call it what it is. I think honestly, our imaginations are worse than what actually is reality, what funeral directors do. And I'm talking about good funeral directors, which I call funeral professionals, whether that be an embalmer or whether that be a funeral director. And the thing about it is when I was growing up is I watched death and life through the eyes of my father, So I would see him come in and talk to us about he's got a funeral the next day, or this person that was very big in the community died, and this is what they did. And it was not scary. And the thing about it was the funeral home was never scary. I'm sure OSHA would not like this, or me, OSHA, if they heard what I'm about to say, but we were funeral home, so if they're going to do anything, sorry, Dad. We were kids, so we would knock on the embalming room door when he was in there and say it's dinner time, or Dad would be cosmetizing a body, which, makeup. They'd already be clothed. They're not naked. They'd be clothed in the casket, and he'd welcome us in while he was doing that and tell us a little bit about this person, but also communicate with us in a non-scary way. This is normal. The thing about death, which is so interesting to me, which I didn't realize until I got older, was most people don't understand that. They don't understand that death is a normal part of life, right? I have the honor now. I really have tried to get to the local high schools. I really want to start telling our generation, we can start educating, but really we're already past that. We need to start educating the youth because they're the ones that, they can find out any answers if they want to anyways. Why not have a professional that's local in your town, funeral director, psychologist, hospice worker, death doula, whatever that equates to in your neighborhood, going in and talking to the students. Suicide is at an all-time high right now. I had a really cool opportunity to come up with a program for the National Funeral Directors Association, and I came up with what was called Loss 101. We have sex education in high schools, but we have nothing on death and grief. There's no guarantee that those kids are going to have sex, but there is a guarantee that those kids will die or deal with death.
We don't learn about taxes either, and nothing is guaranteed but death and taxes.
Taxes. Oh, my English teacher said the same thing. It was awesome. I was like, yeah, that's so true. But and when I realized that, a lot of the higher up in the educational system didn't want me to talk about it.
It makes everybody uncomfortable.
Not only that, but they are afraid if you talk about suicide with high school. Correct. You're going to cause copycats, which we all know is completely wrong, especially my brother who's in the psychology field is like, I will fight for you, Ben, any day of the week. And we know that. It was interesting.
Well, it's just that's why they don't want to talk about sex, because then you'll make kids have sex. I mean, right, because they're not doing that.
Because they're not having, not until you talk about it in the classroom.
Didn't even consider, didn't even cross their mind.
Didn't even know there was girls of the opposite sex or boys. But, it was interesting because I opened up the floor. I was lucky enough to have 2 local schools let me in and talk. And the first question literally that came out of one of the high schoolers was, can you talk about suicide? So automatically they want to hear about it. They want to know about it. We are in a small community, and we lose at least one to one of our local schools every year. And it's one too many. And the other thing, too, which I find is we don't have a good way of expressing grief and talking to grievers, right? And you have a whole season on this, right? This whole grief chapter, and I think it's absolutely wonderful. Thank you for doing this, Jillian, because this is exactly what Doc and I are trying to do to the world. And the big thing is we are bad as Americans dealing with our own grief, and even worse, helping people go through grief.
So bad at helping. So bad.
We're almost worse at helping people with grief than we are our own.
We're bad at helping anybody without giving advice or some kind of suggestion or some kind of Band-Aid or some kind of weird toxic positivity. It's pretty bad.
Well, and especially too, I'm in a very Christian community, right? So Christians and people who are very faith-based don't realize that not everybody is faith-based. So when they make comments like, oh, they're in heaven or they're not in pain
they're in a better place, you're like, what do you mean?
That's like, what are you talking about? You don't know. Prove it to me. And honestly, it doesn't matter if they believe or don't believe. It matters that to them, they need somebody to listen to their story and have a safe place for them to say it. And that's one of the things that I've learned, because I've even messed up. I'll be completely honest. I'm going to humanize myself. I've literally parked the car of a widow and said, how was your day today? Not thinking about it, right? And my favorite one was the actual widow that's like, well, I'm going to be honest with you. It sucks. My wife is dead.
Better.
And I was like, you know what? I need to hear that. Because the thing is, we are human. What I did, which is different from a lot of people, is right away I said, I'm so sorry for saying that. That was a hiccup of a normal conversation, and it shouldn't have been said that way. But I do notice that I shouldn't have said it, and I am sorry that I said it. That's how we get better, right? We're all going to make mistakes because we're human, right?
Yeah.
The biggest problem that I find with grief, and I'm sure you've talked to other people, is there's always a timeline. There's always like, hey, your wife died. It's okay, right? And especially in the workforce. I'll give you 2 days, okay?
Right.
You've only been with this person for 40, 50 years. You can get over it in 2 days, okay?
Yeah.
And that's a huge thing that I'm also trying to fight. Yeah. Is actually allowing a week. That sounds crazy to me, that a lot of companies won't even give you a week to address. A lot of the things that people don't realize, especially when it comes to death and grief, a lot of people can't start their grief process because they're dealing with, where's the will?
Right.
Where's the life insurance?
Yeah, we got to get the death certificates so that we can change the cell phone over, or we're going to get charged
Where's
for
the
2
title
lines.
on Dad's motorcycle?
Yeah, what are we going to do with the thing? I got to call the hospital, make sure the insurance did the right thing. And it's like...
I don't even know where my brother is nowadays. Yeah, you know what I mean?
There's
so much extra
stuff that you have to do.
It's so much, and people don't realize that. And that was one of the things Doc and I tried to do on a couple of the episodes, is like walk people through Social Security. And were they a veteran? Do you have your DD-214? Do you know what that is? These are things you need to talk to people about. And one of the big things that I thought was interesting, listening to a lot of death educators that are really good at what they do, was also how just telling a kid for their first experience in a funeral home what it's going to be like. Right?
Yeah, giving them a preview.
synopsis,
You might
you're
see this. You might see this. You might
people are going to be laughing. People are going to be crying.
Right.
People are going to be saying they're sorry, and you might not understand what they're saying sorry about. You're going to see somebody in a casket, and guess what? Their legs are going to be covered for the most part.
Right.
I had a little kid tug on me one time and say, "What do you do with the legs?"
Oh my gosh.
But kids are concrete.
Because you can't. We're too far gone to think about how to metabolize that as a young person again.
Or they might have a weird uncle that said they probably take all the legs, and that kid's
if you
like,
think
"Oh God,
about
I'm gonna
it,
have nightmares."
The caskets look kind of like when a magician does the body thing.
Yeah.
And they show the top, and then they show the bottom, and then they spin it around, then they open it, then they close it, then they cut in half.
That's
the whole trick.
Or the grandma sleeping.
Right.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's no good.
I shouldn't go to sleep because I probably won't ever wake up again.
Yeah, that's creepy.
I try to get down on my knees when I talk to kids because they want you to come at their level. You come up here, and of course I'm in a suit, right?
Domineering.
It's very
authoritative. Yeah.
And I talk to them about we put them in something to protect them, and you represent it as a present when you get a Christmas or if you get birthday gifts. What does they come in? A box, right? And the fancier the box, the fancier the gift. Like kids are concrete; they understand that, and it protects. And then if you're in my state, they go into most likely a vault, so that's another box protection. Right. So when they go to the cemetery and they see another box, they're like, "Oh, okay, this makes sense. They're protecting grandma or grandpa." Or cremation's another one too, because they'll come in and the parent will throw this urn in front of them and say, "This is grandma," and they don't explain it because those kids are like, "Oh, how do you squeeze grandma in there? Do you have to like break her bones and
this sounds so terrible." Yeah.
But so what Dad and I try to do is try to put a good experience to that. Do you remember a campfire you were at? Did you have a good experience at that? And they're like, "Oh yeah, we loved it. We had s'mores, blah blah blah." And we said, "Okay, you build up this huge teepee of wood." And what happens to that teepee at the end? And they're like, "Oh, it turns to ashes." That's what Grandma and Grandpa did. And then you're equating it to a good experience. Mm-hmm. So it's not, we're burning Grandma. We're putting her in a retort.
Right,
What's
making
that?
it even more traumatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kids are very blunt. They will tell you and they will ask you what they want. And what I tend to do as a funeral director is when I'm looking at a visitation, especially when you have that first hour. We have what's called the first hour, so it's like the family hour. They come in. If they have a pastor, they have that. But they also get the first experience to have their time before people start showing up. And I look at the kid who's not up front, the one who's in the back, or is very shy, standoffish. They're truly the ones that need the most help in that situation, I find, because they're the ones that are not going to be able to ask the question unless you ask them directly. And so anyways, I go to the high schools and I'm starting to talk about this. I'm starting to talk about existentialism, and I'm telling them that grief isn't just the loss of a loved one. The big thing right now is pets, right? People are willing to pay more for pet funerals than they are for their loved one's funeral. So what does that say about society? There's a good... I'm not saying I love my dogs.
Yes.
I love my dogs.
I think people can have super complicated relationships with their family members and things, whereas, your dog isn't going to treat you like shit or
it's unconditional
say that
love.
that they don't approve your lifestyle and or
you can tell them your secrets. They're always there.
They're always there. So it's
absolutely
a slightly different support system in some ways.
But there was a quote, and I can't remember who it was from, but he said, "You can judge a society by how they deal with their dead." So what does it say? This is not a judging thing. When I say these things, it's judging. I want the listener out there to be like, what does that say? What does that actually mean to us? How does death mean to us? I literally went to this huge, like I said, National Funeral Directors Association, surrounded by funeral directors and vendors that deal with funeral homes. And one of them rose their hand and was just completely honest and said, "I did a direct cremation, and then I spent $30,000 on a party." So... In an opinion of a lot of the older funeral directors, they spent very less money on a disposal at that point, and then had a party after. Yet again, I'm not saying right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm trying to say this is how our society is looking at death now and how we deal with it. The problem is a lot of people choose direct cremation. What I mean by direct cremation, I mean without services, without viewing, without anything.
Right.
it's not usually the immediate family that's affected by it. What I mean by that is it's not usually the spouse and the kids. It's usually the grandkids that are messed up because of it. Because us, in millennials especially, a lot of us were raised by our grandparents. We have a deeper connection with our grandparents than we actually do with our parents a lot of the time, right? Yet again, it's the fun parents, right, for a lot of us. They give us the candy. They're always there. They don't judge. They're giving us advice. They have the cool stories. So they die. We haven't seen them, right, because we're in college or we're off in a different state or we're in the military, and then we come home and find out grandma's been cremated. We didn't get an opportunity to say goodbye. We didn't get an opportunity.
That closure or that moment of like the ritual of the death thing. So the ritual of either the saying goodbye, the making peace, the cremation, the service, the visitation, or the casket, wakes are for that reason, to kind of like have people have this kind of closure, to see the body, to know that like this is happening, this happened, so that you can kind of create that closure.
Well, not only that, Jillian, but we as human beings are community-based. We have always been and will always be. When we take out the opportunity for a community to mourn together, and there is a difference between grief and mourn. Do you know the difference, Jillian?
I don't know the dictionary definition, but I would love to hear your separation
so
of those two.
I'll just make it real easy for you. Grief is internal, mourning is out external.
Like communal, yeah, okay.
So, like, having a funeral is a mourning.
Right.
But you grieving at the funeral is grief. So, my thing is we're community-based and we're taking out the community. And that even goes with virtual. Because here's the deal, and I'm sure you can express. You're a dancer. You get it. You've been on theater. You've been in the stage. The best feeling in the world being on stage, I'm a theater kid, is feeling the crowd. Yeah, you almost get more. It's a runner's high. You get an actual extra oomph from a good crowd. And so if you don't have that, it's different. It's not as good. In my opinion, I don't know, you maybe can say something different to that. But there is nothing better than being on a stage and getting the support from a crowd. Basically, that is how I feel, in a very bad way of saying it, is the reason why funerals and wakes are so important. Because what I find is, and people will say this after a funeral, say, I never knew my dad did that. I never knew my dad had that experience with them. Another thing to think about, too, our parents, a lot of them went out of high school and went right to the factories. And they worked there for 30-plus years, 12-hour shifts. They spent more time with their colleagues that's been on the same line with them for 30 years than they did with their own families. And in our society and in America, they don't have any rights to that body. Just like grandkids have no rights to their grandparents' bodies. So the thing is when you take away that opportunity, because as much people don't need that, a lot of people don't need the funeral, and they don't need the wake, and they don't need a burial place. They know they want to remember the person how they were. That's fine. There's as many people who need an opportunity.
And where do you put like a celebration of life in these things? Like
same thing.
Okay, like
I have no problem with that, because you're still gathering.
Right, because I do find that celebration of lives are kind of like they have a mourning undertone because people are sad that this person's gone, obviously. But it seems like their attempt to kind of like be a bit more uplifting than maybe a more traditional, like a Catholic, because I was raised Catholic. I'm
Roman Catholic too.
I was raised. So those are the most of the funerals I've been a part of. So there's a much different,
Somber,
temperature and somberness, and like there's a way that you dress and a way that you act and the things that you say and the things that you don't say and whereas the celebration of life is sometimes there's performances and film strips and like there's just more, it's almost a bit more theatrical of the whatnot of that. So I was wondering how you felt about that. But I think there's something very ritualistic about death that I think helps anybody move through the grief process. That is necessary. And I think it could be probably quite different for everybody, but I think it could be very difficult to start moving through grief if you don't have that kind of, whatever that is for you, that I saw the body, or I I went and was with the people who were all talking about this person and they weren't there. Whatever that is, that kind of like makes that very real and transitions that thing from the person being there to not to physically not being there, not just they're not here right now. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, well, some people need to actually see the body
mm-hmm.
in the casket to
Mm-hmm.
fully understand that that person is dead.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to say passed away, and I'm not going to say gone.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start using the actual definitions of dead. Because that's another thing, too. We almost sugarcoat everything about death now,
Mm-hmm.
right? Passed away, passed peacefully. Like, why are we not saying death? Why is death such a dirty word? I always equate this to what's the opposite of death is birth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've had the honor and the blessing of watching my wife give birth twice. And of course, I'm the funeral director, so I'm like, I'm kind of pre-med, so I want to be up there. I want to do everything. Birth is not clean.
Mm-hmm.
Death is not clean.
Mm-hmm.
But when you talk about birth, it's always congratulations. That's awesome. That's wonderful. That's beautiful. Why can't death be beautiful?
Mm-hmm.
And it is. The thing, too, and going back to the conversation you said, why us kids of funeral directors almost have a different aspect is because we see the beauty in death, too.
Mm-hmm.
We actually get to hear the widows and widowers of 30 years whisper things to each other. We get to see the family member that says, I'm so glad mom's not suffering anymore from this cancer.
Right.
We get to see they got to come home and watch their show or get to experience Christmas or died what they would love to do, working on woodwork and then in the barn outside and had a heart attack, had a coronary. I see that. I see the beauty in the funeral. I see the beauty in death. Think about it. If we had the opportunity to live forever, how boring would that be?
I mean, besides boring, I just think we wouldn't be able, without contrast, there is no, highs and lows,
Correct.
without any kind of, without high stakes, there is no real difference from day to day, right? Everything just
what's
becomes.
the point of doing something? You know what I mean? At that point, and I always equate it to the high schoolers. Like any vampire movie, watch them.
Mm-hmm.
They're miserable.
They really
They're
are
absolutely miserable, and they always know that they're cursed.
Yeah.
They're damned literally into everything that they do, and a lot of them hate their lives, hate their absolute existence. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I always try to say, like, think about it. Think about the first time you've seen a basketball. It rolled up to you, you were a kid, and you're like, this is the coolest thing ever. It can bounce. You can throw it in a net. Mm-hmm. This is the wonderful thing. Then the 30,000th time you see a basketball, you're like, oh, it's a basketball.
Right.
Eventually, you get to experience. Now, I'm not saying everybody, right, because some of us don't have those years. Mm-hmm. Some of us don't have 80, 90 years. Mm-hmm. Some of us have a day. Some of us don't even get a day.
Right.
So my thing is, what I find is us grieving is actually the beauty of it, right? Because grieving is love. Death is love. Mm-hmm. That's what death is. It's love. And we choose, as humans, just like everything else, how to deal with that love. And I feel like we have not been taught to look at it that way. We're always looking at death as it's a dirty little secret. We can't talk about it. Almost like it's not going to happen, but then all of a sudden it does happen, and then we're surprised.
Yeah, I have neglected to tell you this up to this point, but I'm also from the Midwest. I'm from Minneapolis originally, and I grew up there and lived there for 18 years, and then I moved to Los Angeles, and it's still the culture in the Midwest, specifically in my family, is very much like, oh, you'll never guess who died. But it's like, well, I hate to break it to you, but
They're
that's
94 years old.
Be all of us at some point, but it is very much like this, well, it's almost like this, like,
surprise. You're right.
Yeah,
it's
or like,
who would have thought?
Oh no, like, and I mean, it is no, and it is sad, and depending on the person's scenario, situation, or maybe altogether it's all sad, but it does always have this thing like, heaven forbid, God forbid, and it's kind of like, well, there's the undercarriage of those types of statements is this idea that it's not going to happen to you. You don't want to deal with it. You don't want to think that it could happen to you, and that you should avoid it. And if you can avoid it, or there is some way to avoid it, and but everybody inherently knows there isn't. So I've always recognized that as kind of like an interesting thing. Growing up in the Midwest, and I'm sure it's no different in the South or in the East or in the West. I think that's a very American thing, is like you said earlier, paraphrasing, but we don't really deal with it. We don't know how to deal with it. We're not good at dealing with loss. We're not good at dealing with grief or mourning, and we're certainly not good at helping other people with that or dealing with other people with that for the most part. Um, I love that you're going into schools and talking to kids. I think it's important to talk about this stuff because young people are dealing with all the things we are now. They just are being like oddly sheltered, which makes them feel very alone in it and makes them feel like, they're having these adult experiences and feelings, but no adults are like, hey, let's talk about this like an adult, like,
Well, it doesn't
so
make
they're
any
kind of
sense.
like
It
left on
doesn't.
their own.
Well, it doesn't make any sense to me because a year from then, they can pick up a gun and fight for our country.
Right.
So that's okay, and that's American and patriotic to go out and fight for us and maybe lose your life in
Yeah.
the line of duty. But we can't talk about death.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
It just goes to show. Going back to your thing, it's like death is a surprise,
Mm-hmm.
and it's interesting. You said that we want to avoid death. That's called death anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
That's 100% what's called
Mm-hmm.
death anxiety. When you go out of your way to try to hide from death. The problem is when you hide from death, you're not what?
Living.
Living.
Yeah.
Therefore, Doc and I is always our tagline for
Right.
our podcast.
I love the tag. Give the tagline because I love the tagline.
If you're not talking about death, you're not living.
Yes.
And that's so true because the idea is the more we talk about death, the more it loses its sting.
Mm-hmm.
The more that we are open and can finally breathe, we can live. Because the idea is if we're not, right, I know of people who are suffocated by death anxiety. Now, don't get me wrong. I am a professional in death, and I still deal with death anxiety.
That's
we
comforting.
all do.
Yeah.
I have kids, right?
Right.
What am I leaving them?
Right.
That's a whole different dynamic when you have children. And I don't want to say that because I know there's a lot of listeners that
Right.
never had the opportunity to have children or lost children, and
Right.
my heart goes out to you that have lost children,
Mm-hmm.
because that should never happen. That's the toughest part of my job is
Mm-hmm.
is burying a 3-year-old and then going home and then throwing my 3-year-old up
Right.
in the air and
Right.
pretending that everything's okay. I still am human. I will give you my example. You brought up the addiction community
Mm-hmm.
during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
It was the worst time to be a funeral director. Absolutely worst time to be a funeral director.
You guys are
because
busy as hell, though. Busy as hell.
We were. But the problem is in my small community, half the people
Right.
didn't believe in what was actually going on.
That's
And there was
rough.
no trust.
That's rough.
So we had rules like you can only have 10 people in the funeral home. You had to be 6 feet apart, blah, blah, blah,
and
blah.
people are not having that.
They were harassing us
Yeah.
to the point where I thought you were a better funeral director to take care of this family. On
Right,
top of it, my
just-
dad poorly had back surgery and was out this whole time, a lot of the time. So I was running the funeral home by myself, and it got to the point where alcohol was really the only escape from a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously I'm 2 years sober, so everybody out there, you can do it, and it's worth every second to not be hungover.
Yes, and I second
Um,
that. I second that big time. Him and I talked about sobriety before this. We're both sober. It's please, if you're early in your sobriety, just keep going. One day at a time is definitely the mantra of choice, and it's
And
for
ask
real.
for help. We're
Yeah.
out there. You would be surprised how many people that you're in communication with either A, are struggling with this, or B, have struggled with this. And the thing about it was I was poorly managing my anxiety, my death anxiety, and grief. And that's a big thing too, going back into that, Jillian. I want to talk about that. Going back to death isn't really the only grief, especially when it comes to high schoolers.
Mhm.
They're in a lot of them right now with divorce, right? What's
Mhm.
divorce? It's death of family, death
Yep.
of normalcy, death of a pet. We've already talked about that. They lose a friend, death of a friendship. They lose a community. Their parents get a new job and they have to go someplace else. We just had a pandemic, death of society.
Right. Death of
Right?
so many things, of landmark things that they thought they were going to be able to do, or social experiment, social experiences, and some of them miss their proms, they miss their graduations, they miss so many things.
Sports. A lot of them, they've spent their whole life doing sports.
Right.
Right? So they didn't have that year to go to college and
Yep.
all that. Anyways, it's beside the point. But one of my big things that I always say to and this maybe will blow your mind, Jillian, because Nick explained this to me, especially because we're both existentialists. Every decision, how many decisions a day do you make, Jillian? From beginning to the end.
Well, that's going to be a number that's in the massive hundreds of thousands because
Correct.
I have a lot of mental noise and a lot of debate over everything always.
ADHD runs in our family too. So
You know,
you...
and when you talk about death anxiety, like I want to take it even a step further and say the more controlling you are or the more you seek control, it's all elusive, right? You have absolutely not a lot of control, and there's however much control you think you have, cut that in half, cut it again in half, cut it again in half, and that's how much
Right.
you actually have. But so the more control seeking you are, and I'm someone who is highly seeking control all the time. That is how much death anxiety you probably have, because when you really come down to it, it's your not being in control of when you're piecing out, unless of course there is an option for that, which we're not going to celebrate or like get extremely into. But like if you are not wanting to die in this moment, the feeling that could happen at any point in time to you and you don't get to say how, when, like that's a control freak's fucking nightmare.
But you can control, Jillian, but you can control how you act on those
100%. And then you have to sit there and be like, look, I can't control that. And then you have to go to 12-step meetings and you have to say I'm powerless.
Isn't there relief? Isn't there relief to that, Jillian, though? At the end of the day, when you can say I can't control, and that's okay.
I can't control it. I can't. It's out of my control. Like, and if this is going to happen, like if I'm on a plane, I'm not going to save the plane. If I'm going to, I'm either going to live or not. It's not up to me. It's up to the pilot. Even them, I don't know, it's there. These are conversations I have to.
What kind of bagel did he have that morning?
Right? Is he sober? Was he tired? Is he hungover? Like, is this person have a mental episode? Like, what's going on? Every day it's like, in the car, like, okay, I'm driving, like, well, I'm just going to try to drive as safe and consciously and whatever is possible and try to be as calm as possible, because I do believe that, like, in the times that I have had things with cars, my energy has been chaotic. Do you know what I'm saying? Like angry or chaotic.
It's
angry,
crazy.
Chaotic driving. Like that's
absolutely. And we have death machines that we're behind. We're literally behind a death machine for ourselves and for others. But anyways, going back to all the decisions. So if you were looking for anxiety,
you came to the right podcast.
Well, I wanted to say all the decisions, and you make 1,000, right? Especially you being a control freak, and I don't mean that. I don't mean that only in the best way.
No, it is. Yeah.
Think about this. Mm-hmm. You are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Grieving every decision you don't make.
Probably.
So think of every decision you make subconsciously. You are grieving every decision you don't make.
I do think I'm pretty good about, once I've made a decision, getting on board.
But subconsciously, are you?
I actually think I'm pretty good about this. Now, there's some things.
Don't let me bring in Freud in here.
No. There's some things that took me a really long time to decide.
Okay.
But there's also, I do feel like once I've made a decision, I don't typically try to waver. I could be totally out of my mind. Because I actually am someone who doesn't like being in indecision. So I would rather make a decision and fully go that way than sit in the middle. And if I'm wavering back and forth, what I do, and maybe this is the same thing and I've just categorized it, is I spend a lot of time.
Because you control everything.
Yeah, see? Yes. Thank you for understanding my plight. I'm either in the future, which is anxiety, or I'm in the past, which is depression.
Oh, Doc always says the best. Stay out of the DeLorean.
Yeah, for me to be present is difficult. I struggle with it very much. But so I'm usually, and I talk about this with dancers too, and you would understand this as a musician. I'm like, if you are ahead of the beat, you are in the future, and you are giving me anxiety because you're telling me what's coming before it's coming. You're literally you're being a psychic dancer, but I don't want to know the future because I don't want to know what step is next before it's supposed to happen. And if you are behind the beat, you're slower. Now I'm depressed watching you because you're not up to speed with the music. I need you to be right on the music, like you are creating the music. I need you to be one with the music, right in the present, right in the pocket. And so, like, as a viewer, if you're ever watching someone and you're kind of highly anxious, it might be because they're kind of like ahead of the beat. And if you're watching them and you're a little kind of sad, it might be because they're lagging a little bit. Because that's how I watch too. I'm like, why do I feel this, that?
What
But
if the choreographer's goal was to get everybody anxious in the crowd?
I mean, I don't. I think that would be a director's goal. A choreographer is gonna like, please still be on the music. Like, I'll give you movement that is anxiety provoking, or we'll choose music that is anxiety provoking, and we'll show it through movement. But like, to be off the music is like not usually a choreographer's dream. No matter what they're trying to portray. But
So when I say this to the high schoolers,
mhm.
their mind just goes blown because
Yeah.
you think like even like if I didn't brush my teeth, how
Right.
would the day end up? If I didn't tie the one shoe, if I
Right.
tied left instead of right,
Right.
how would that be? And I find the best way to deal with people's grief is to get them questioning everything.
Mm.
Because a lot of them don't have that opportunity, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of them don't understand that like we got to go into Kubler-Ross, right? We got to get the 5 stages here of dying, which is another thing that people get so miscalculated. It's not about grieving. It's about dying. That's what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross came up with, the 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. That was with her sitting with dying patients.
And I'm so glad you said that, because if you are an avid listener of Gray Maybe, or you're interested enough to listen to another episode, earlier in this season, I interviewed my friend and master in psychology, Jada Ellingham, and she talks about how the 5 stages of grief are bullshit. But we were talking about it as far as people who are grieving, not as far as people who are dying. Now that is
Correct.
different. The 5 stages of grief, you are absolutely correct. That is for people who are going through the death process themselves. They are dying.
Correct.
Now, people who are witnessing the dying, that's the 5 stages of grief. You could be all up in that, all over the place.
Well, that's the
for
biggest
years.
problem, too. That's the biggest problem is they realize that a lot of the same steps you kind of go through when you're grieving. The problem with that is now you're categorizing. Never categorize grief. That's the biggest problem. Doc and I talk because there's a new thing, and I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not counseling, and I'm not saying, but I can tell you this: I don't like is either in the new diagnostic of something called prolonged grief. They're trying to put a timeline on it. Grief is not a timed thing.
Yeah.
And the problem is it's not a graduation.
Mm-hmm.
It's not you get a diploma and then you never have to deal with it again. You could be in acceptance, right? I'm putting the quotes out there.
Right.
And then you have a smell the next day that gets you right back to the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. There is no script. There is no choreography for how to deal with grief. We make our own. And the big thing is we try to do as humans is we try to build everybody else's grief choreography. When really, stay on the beat, right? Stay on our own beat.
Right.
Don't go to theirs. Right. And you're absolutely right. And I love how you brought up anxiety, and I love how you brought up depression with the future and the past. Living in the moment is the hard thing. And we as addicts, which I'm not trying to put words in, you said it and I said it, right? So we can do that. Is we try to control everything when really, in all honesty, we need to let the flow happen, and then we be here to deal with the flow and to help people, right? That's our big goal, right? Is to help other people that are struggling with it. Yet again, if you are struggling with any addiction or thought or suicidality, go out and get help. They're out there and people care. You are not a burden. You are a blessing. Everybody who's listening to this, it's hard. It's so hard for me because some of this to me seems so naturally like, why don't we get this? Right?
Mm-hmm.
The more I talk about it, the more I realize that like it's quite kind of simple. Not as how do we deal with grief? That's obviously a very difficult thing. But this whole thing of us, you and I right now, are going to be better in our grief journey because of this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Whether we knew it or not, I'm going to learn things from you and you're going to learn from me. And I've learned that even more. I learn more from my families than I do from the education that I get outside. And I think that has partially to do with in the psychology world, they do a wonderful job, but they're not in it every day, right? So unless you're delving in like funeral directors, death doulas, hospice workers.
You guys are specialty in that department.
We're doing. We're with the people. We're actually living that emotion. Are we perfect? No, none of us are perfect. Hell, if anybody says they're perfect in the death field, please send them my way because I'd love to know the answer. But the thing is these conversations are the way that we become better. And it's that easy. I tell families all the time, they're like, how do we get it started? I said, you know what you do? You have a dinner.
Mm-hmm.
Food is always the best place to have these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And you just say, hey, let's be honest about it. This is an awkward conversation. I don't know how it's going to go, but I want to talk about what I want to do when my time comes and how you all feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Honestly, a night,
Yeah.
a 2-hour conversation is more than most people have.
And this is like one of the questions that I wanted to ask you is, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I really want you to kind of like lay it out, is like tips or suggestions for people to consider regarding arranging while they're still able to make arrangements. So, I saw this little thing on one of the social medias. It's like, my algorithm knows me so well. It's like trying to sell me products. And like it's this product that's like this little like multi-folder little box thing, and it's got like a folder for like deeds or titles, a folder for like this and that, a photo. So it's like basically a one-stop shop area, and it's got like it can have passport ID. It's like, and they call it like the vault, and it's like it's just like a paper thing, but it's like it's this thing that basically like all your stuff is in one place, so that when the time comes, if something, see, even I said, if something happens, when something happens,
So mysterious.
it may be a really long time away, but like when something happens, this person that you might be partially responsible for working out all of the things, it's all in one place. So that on top of immense grief and sadness and discomfort and chaos, you're not also scattering through filing cabinets and racking your brain for where someone might have put something, or having to reorder, refill out forms to get like, what insult to injury, because unfortunately the way our society works, like companies don't care that your loved one passed away. They need to see a death certificate or they're not going to give you what you need.
Yep.
They don't care. Like there's not going to be, if you're lucky if someone gives a shit when you have these conversations, like the hoops that my mom had to jump through just recently with her cellular provider to get my recently deceased dad's name off of the account.
Wow.
It was done wrong like 4 times. Like it was, and I'm just like the sheer energy of this woman, because my dad was ill for a while. We are all very comfortable with his passing because his quality of life was not good at
His
all.
death.
Yes, the last bit of quality of his life was not good.
Right.
So death was a relief, I think, for him, especially knowing how he
Absolutely.
was. And so, the audacity of these companies to like put my mom through the ringer. Like, luckily she had the energy to deal with it. I would not. I would just be like, fuck it. Then my dead dad's gonna be on this account till fucking the day. Like I would just be like, fine. I don't care. Like I just would. I don't know what I would do. But there's these. So this is a long-winded way of saying, you've mentioned a little bit like having the conversation over food. Like, what are your, like, I'm very clear with what my parents wanted for their death. My mom has it all written out. She has a prepaid funeral. She's very organized. My dad had a prepaid funeral. So everything was very streamlined with them. They're very clear about everything. Me and my brother, I don't think we're clear about it. Like, me and my significant other, I don't think we're clear. Like, so that's the first thing, right? Like, have these conversations. And then are there other things that you just know through your experience that people should consider?
Absolutely. So, first, I want to talk about the world. There's 2 words that always come to mind when you talked about the cell provider. There's apathy versus empathy. And the United States right now, sadly, is participating in teaching us to use apathy and not empathy. Mm-hmm. Because if we use apathy, then we don't have to care and we don't have to give ourselves to anything. We're very selfish, individualistic. Going back to community-based, we should be a community-based. We're now an individualistic.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the product of capitalism. I think capitalism
100%.
has made us that way. I don't think we are that way. I think we've been made to kind of be that way.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The problem is we think we can deal with grief on our own. And we think grief is we can get everything we want in 2 days, right? Mm-hmm. So we can deal with grief in 2 days.
Right.
And that's not, there's no timeline going back.
Right.
Anyways,
The update of the last Apple only took me 5 seconds. It takes me like 2 seconds to pull up this website. Why don't I feel better yet?
remember when we had to do updates and they took like the whole night? Like,
Let's just
come back
talk
in
about
6-8 hours.
dial up.
And Mom would try to use the phone. Who's on the computer?
Oh,
Who's
I
on
couldn't
the
get
computer?
through. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, and you'd be on MSN Messenger or AIM, and you'd be like, okay, so
Yeah.
my friend's going to get on.
Yeah.
It's going to happen.
Yeah. For the kids, AIM was short for AOL Instant
Oh,
Messenger.
sorry.
And it's where we
Sorry.
all got our typing
And MSN
skills.
Messenger.
It's
they
where we
had the
learned how to
two.
type fast.
Yeah, that's where
children.
we did. And you'd wait, and maybe nobody would come on. Anyways, apathy versus empathy. That's a big thing I wanted to. If we actually cared, right? Because I was always going back to being a son of a funeral director. I was always taught every time these people are coming in, they could be having the worst day of their life. And how would you, going back to us being Catholic, and I'm not saying this is good, right, or indifferent, or wrong or right. I'm just saying we were always taught like the golden rule, right?
Mm-hmm.
Treat somebody how you'd want to be treated. It's really that simple. And so the idea is, if it was your dad who died, how would you want to address? How would you want somebody to address you?
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, that's empathy, right? That's the idea that you care enough to want to be in their shoes and help them through this process.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to be apathetic.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to not care.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the sad part. We don't care. So now, on top of we don't deal with death good ourselves, now we have a community that doesn't want to deal with us at all.
Right.
So going back to your thing, and all I could think about, you know those folders that look like accordions?
Yes.
You know what I mean? That's
Yes,
all
like
I could
that.
think
Kinda
about.
like
you
that,
put
but they're, like,
everything in
different.
there.
But these are
Yes.
different. This is much
Colors?
cooler.
Oh,
But
that's
yes,
so
but
cool.
like the accordion folder
I don't know.
would
I think
still
the
work.
accordion folder, Trapper
Old
Keeper, would be
school.
really cool.
Yeah.
Trapper Keeper for all you non-millennials was
But they
really
are
cool.
these old folders with 3-ring
They
bindings.
had really cool. Who was the girl artist? Frank.
Lisa Frank.
Lisa Frank. And
Shout
Trapper
out.
Keepers. Anyways,
Yeah.
another point. So going back to it. So the big term would be pre-need,
Mm-hmm.
right, for funerals. That would be the big terminology. But you always hear like living wills
Mm-hmm.
and have like DNR and all this. The big thing that I would say, if you're married, if you're lucky enough to be married, have at least a conversation with your spouse. I would even go further as if you have children, have it with not only your spouse but your children,
Mm-hmm.
because us that are married have the problem of always doing things together a lot of the time. So we get in a car accident. If
Right.
you left only your wishes with your wife or vice
Right.
versa,
Someone else has to know.
now
outside of it.
nobody knows.
Yeah.
Here's the other thing. Write things down.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's a pain for some of you. Some of you are literature freaks, so you love this idea. You're like, yeah, just give me another excuse to write a thesis. But for most of you, why I say that is because you'd be surprised. I always challenge the high schoolers, too, to write their own obituary. Because that opens their eyes to a lot of things, too, because they don't realize, oh, I actually do want to be buried, or I actually do want to be cremated. The thing that I would suggest, in your local funeral home, most of them will have what's called a packet. It's boring stuff, but it's basically what you did, when you did it, et cetera, et cetera. Because what I find when the kids come in, a lot of the conversation is, I don't remember when they got married, which is kind of sad. I know my parents' anniversary, but
Right.
I get it. They don't know where the DD-214. That's another thing. If you're a veteran, you have what's called the DD-214. It's your honorable discharge paperwork. Your family will need that for a couple things. If you don't know where that is, or if you have it, because the old filing system was really interesting of the boomers. It is, I'm going to put it in one place, but it's going to be literally like every receipt I've had since 1930 on top of it all.
Nice.
So I know a lot of families, your mom seems to be this way, and I find this, you're very lucky that there's one spot you know where to go. Something happens, you know where it is, and it's going to be like
I have a good idea of
categorized.
Yeah.
It'll have chapters. It'll have
I
the
think
inserts.
there's a
with the
folder. Yep. I think there's
Here's
a folder.
and we're Catholic, so here's the 3 verses I want. These are the 3 songs.
Here's the Psalms. Here's
On
the
Eagle's
thing, yeah.
Wings is going to be there. You know.
Oh yes.
We
and
could start all
my mom was very clear about what was to be served at the funeral after the funeral.
Rosary the night before. It's a whole thing for Catholics, but God bless you all. You're Catholics out here. There's 2 Catholics speaking here. Because once you're confirmed, I
I,
guess
I would just like
this.
the record to state I am no longer a practicing Catholic. I've been a
Right.
renegade for a very long time, but I still,
Rebel.
yeah,
Punk
I
rock.
still understand the rituals.
And going back to it, so my easiest thing is this. If you don't want to do any of that, if you don't want to go to the local funeral home, because you can go to your local funeral home and start a file. You don't have to pay any money. You can literally say, this is where I want to be buried. This is the church, if we can have it. This is the pastor. I want a visitation and a funeral the next day. This is the burial. Here's my burial plot, information, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And the funeral home will have that. So even if you did that, then your kids, you got to tell your kid where you went because you have the choice of funeral home. So make sure you tell them that. But at that funeral home now, you have something. Mm-hmm. So if something happens, you actually have some paperwork. My suggestion is you sit down with your family, which is your spouse and your children, if they're old enough to have this conversation, and you say, when the time comes, these are the people you need to communicate with. You need to know my insurance agent. This is who you call. Mm-hmm. You need to know who's my broker or whatever. You need to call them. My DD-214 and the will to the house and the will and the deed to the house and the deed to the cars, they're all in one location. This is where you go. So what you're saying is absolutely wonderful because it's one place. Mm-hmm. What I would suggest is, even though it's in one place, have it in 2 places. Because if your house burns down,
a thing,
or something happens in the, you go to a nursing home and things get moved.
Well, I'm sure you could put it electronically, put it somewhere in a cloud or something, a file, and
electronically, or go get one of those deposit boxes at a bank.
Right.
Put it in there that you have to have a key and they have to have a key.
You got to trust banks to do that, though.
That's true. And the old boomers don't trust banks. They still hide money.
I don't. I'm not trusting the bank. No, I mean, I'm very.
I get you.
Whatever. But yeah.
So
all of that
stuff. And then on top of it, this is where I want people to know this. Have the conversation with them on what would you like, and see if they have different information. Because you might, because I hear this all the time. I don't want my kids and grandkids to have to deal with my death.
Right, but you're going to have to.
You're going to deal with it. And so they're going to grieve, and you're maybe not giving them the opportunity to grieve that they want to. They'll call, can I see Grandma one last time? I'm so sorry, Grandma's already been cremated. And you can just hear the silence. And then they're going to call my brother, who's a psychologist, and have 10 to 20 years because they never had the opportunity to say goodbye to a grandma. Now, whether you agree, disagree, or think of that, my thing is an extra, because it's always money, right? It always comes down to money. Is an extra $2,000 or an extra $1,000 or an extra $500 just to have something more important than your grandchild struggling for 3 to 5 years? Yet again, we don't know the answer to that. But I will say, I can tell you from a lot of people that I've talked to, is they wish they would have had an opportunity, or they end up having the service the second time because we didn't like what happened, that there was nothing. It was like Mom died and there was nothing.
Right.
She lived 90 years. We didn't do an obituary. We didn't have anything. Dad dies and it's like, oh, no, we're not doing that. That was disposal, right? Because these kind of comments, thoughts get into your head. I'm not saying you have to do that, and I'm not forcing anybody to do that. I'm just saying, if you have these conversations with your loved ones, you might be surprised what they say. They might all say, no, we're good. You do whatever you need to do. But some of them will say, Mom, I want to have an opportunity to say goodbye to you. And I have no problem paying the extra amount to have that opportunity. Or another thing, too, with cremation, which is interesting. So if in Michigan, state of Michigan, yet again, I'm from Michigan, if your spouse has full rights of you. So if you die first, your spouse has the right to cremate you or not cremate you. If you and your spouse both die in an accident, or the other spouse is already gone, then it goes down to children, and you have to have a majority rule. That's something that people don't realize. So if you have 2 children and one says no and one says yes, you can't be cremated. So that adds extra grief on top of it.
Right.
Or dad becomes senile at the end. He has Alzheimer's or is dealing with dementia. Tells one son he wants to be cremated and one son he wants to be buried. and then you're having this internal. If
Right.
you've already had a discussion before when you're saying a mind, these conversations might be better when they come in, and they are better because I've never had a family that we've suggested to have a conversation or do a pre-need or do a information file, which would be pre-need without money, come back and say, I'm so mad that you made us do that. They've always said, I'm so glad because I can actually start grieving and actually experience the funeral, memorial service, or whatnot. Because it's a perfect example, Jillian. If you didn't have mom and dad do the pre-need and you're going to that funeral, your mind can't think of what's actually going on at that moment. You're worried about, okay, where's the paperwork? Where's the insurance? Who do I have to call after this, right? So you're not even there if you had something. I'm just saying this is
and even just like when decisions aren't clear and there is any kind of disagreement within the family. I was very lucky that my brother, myself, and my mom were all very aligned in every step of this for my dad, from the minute that we started to have to make some decisions at the hospital to, everything after that. So that was I was really, really lucky that we were just aligned on everything, because that is just not the case for a lot of families. And grieving is hard enough. Mourning is hard enough. To add that kind of stress of there being, disagreement, and infighting and ill feelings and all of that. Like, I just, grief sucks the energy out of you. I don't know how much extra energy, it's just so exhausting, all of that extra,
It's just adding traumatic grief to something that doesn't have to be traumatic grief.
Yes.
And you
exactly
dealt with, and you had an honor, right? Because you said your dad, it was a long process, right, to death?
Yes, he had a PSP, which is supranuclear palsy, which is, they believe it's a buildup of tau in the brain that is kind of similar to Alzheimer's, but instead of not knowing like names or remembering things, it affects your motor skills. So everybody, what's going on, but your ocular nerve, which lets your eyes scan down and up, stops working. Your swallowing will stop swallowing. So oftentimes these people aspirate. Once they get close to end of life, their walk is affected. They become immobile. Basically, every physical part of your body just starts shutting down.
So they become trapped.
Yeah, prisoners of their mind. I would assume. I don't know how much my dad was. I don't know what reality he was living in, but I can't imagine that it was particularly pleasant. So
you had the opportunity to do anticipatory grief.
Yes.
Which is you were already grieving the loss of your dad before your dad actually died.
And my dad was a very unhealthy man. He smoked cigarettes his whole life. He was a drinker. So I actually had started anticipatory grieving my dad from when I was a child. I didn't think he would make it to 75, 74 years old. He had his first stroke when I was in my early 20s. So I have, the fact that he got to 74 was incredible to me. But I've spent my whole life grieving him anticipatory, just because of like growing up and knowing about the smoking campaigns and the drinking campaigns and the stroke, and then But yes, I think it was a benefit to have the anticipatory grief. Correct. Because I was able to kind of say the things I wanted to say, or get the relationship to where I wanted to get it as best I could before he passed.
And that's the beauty, right? That's the beauty in your grief, was you had that opportunity that a lot of people don't have that opportunity. They don't have the opportunity to even discuss that, right? Dad just has a heart attack at 52, like my my grandfather did.
Shocking grief, or the surprise.
And so I've learned both sides of death from a very young age. So my predecessor, great grandfather, lived till 92, had Alzheimer's. The last 8 years of his life wasn't himself. Then my grandfather, my dad's dad, was 52 and died of a massive coronary. Hit it, died within an instant. And the last words he had to my father was, make sure the family tomorrow is ready for the funeral, which is, by the way, another testament to a funeral director.
Right.
I'll always remember that. I had the opportunity to watch my other grandfather on my mom's side have Parkinson's and watch him become a drooling child, basically, and then die. This brilliant man who was not who only had his high school education and became this owner of this huge plumbing corporation, smartest man ever knew. And but it's at the point. I had the opportunity to watch him take his last breaths, and it was the most blessing, honorable thing that I could have had in my career, because at that point I was ready for him. And in all honesty, in my opinion, I would have liked to not seen him suffer for another year like he was to 2 years. But we don't have that option, right? Which kind of gives another whole section, Jillian. We could talk about the assisted suicide and doctor-assisted suicide, which is a whole thing that Doc and I have talked about on our podcast.
Oh, you have done that one. Okay, good.
Yes.
If you guys haven't tuned into the Let's Talk About Death podcast, it's a really good one. There's a bunch of episodes. Some of them are nice and short. So, my podcasts are always long because I talk way too much. But like a lot of their episodes are 20, 30 minutes, quick, get your fix. And they talk about some really fun, sometimes it's fun things about grief. Like one of my favorite episodes was talking about grief, one-upping one's grief. I thought that was like such a great topic to talk about because, and it reminded me of that SNL character, Penelope, who Kristen Wiig used to play, who's like the notorious one-upper. It didn't matter what you said, she was going to one-up it. But anyways, so it's a great podcast. I'm glad you guys talk about that subject too, because that's also a really important one, is the right to end your own life or on your own terms if you're chronically ill or in a lot of pain and whatnot. I have a couple fastball questions I want to ask you.
Got it.
Okay. So, and this one, I hope it's a fastball, but I don't think it can be, but we'll give it a go.
I apologize too.
No, just because of the way this,
no,
we're both talkers, but also this question is, whatever. Yeah. Okay. So do you have any unexplained, mystical, magical experiences that have accompanied your journey, being in and around death? Like, does your home have some charge? Are there things that are lights that don't turn off or lights that come on? Is any of that stuff up in your experience?
So Doc and I have been told by mediums that we already have a third eye.
Okay.
So I'm trying to open that, but just like everything else, it takes practice. I have noticed things, especially that I think my predecessors are always around, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, because they had control issues. So they want to make sure their kids are taken care of.
Like you're going to kick that in death,
Right, absolutely. And I think obviously for them it's a different, I'm sure they're rooting Dad and I on, but I think they're here. The interesting part is I don't think spirits are here from other people. I don't. I think spirits would stay where they
like your
died.
direct link. Okay.
Yeah, because the funeral home is not where they were.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's not where they have unfinished business. My grandfather and great-grandfather, they spent their lives in this building and obviously lived in these buildings just like we did. It's a generational thing. So I think they're around. On top of that, my great-grandfather on my dad's side, but not the funeral home side, he died for 5 minutes clinically. He told my dad, grandson, don't be afraid to die. I saw my mom, felt my mom, heard my mom, saw my mom. And the hardest part was going back because she said it wasn't my time. So I 100% believe that there is an afterlife, whether that's heaven, clouds, what you want it to be. I think heaven is what you want it to be. I really do. I find that there is something. We have energy. We know that, right? Scientifically, they've proven that energy stays after we die. So where does that energy go? That's the question. I do think that I have a third eye. I think because of society and because of being what I am, I've learned to close it. I think all of us as children have the opportunity to do things that we as adults tend to force ourselves not to be able to. So that's the quick answer on that?
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that answer. I have people who have died come to me in my dreams oftentimes. My dad hasn't come yet, but it takes a while. It doesn't happen right away. It can take almost a year or two before people that have died will come to me in my dreams.
I have one more thing before I think about it. So my grandfather, who I got the opportunity to watch die, he was my godfather. And my mom, I was pregnant. My wife was pregnant.
What? I was like,
it was a whole thing.
What?
It's the first immaculate.
You should have started with this.
But my wife was pregnant at the time, and I really wanted him to meet my well, at the time it would have been granddaughter, but we didn't know. Me and my wife chose not to know. My mom had a dream before we gave birth that she saw her dad holding a baby and said, "Patty, she's beautiful," and didn't want to tell us. So then we were amazed because I thought it was going to be a boy, and of course it was a girl. And so I said that, and my mom just started crying. She said, "I knew it was going to be a girl because my dad told me that."
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I've gotten information in dreams from dead people that I have no way of that I shouldn't have known. And then when my dad was passed in the process of dying, the TV went on, channels were changing, and then after he had died at the funeral, we had like a little DVD film strip thing, like the little life celebration thing, and it wouldn't work. And I was like, "Cause Dad doesn't fucking like our celebration of life that we put together."
He didn't like the song you picked, the pictures
he
you
didn't
picked.
Like
he
it.
was
Whatever.
Not a fan
He
of
was
it.
like booty. He did not like it. My brother did get it to work, but like I don't think he was into it. But
explain booty to me.
Booty is just like no good. I mean, normally I'm a very pro butt, podcast.
Wait, I was gonna say,
like,
isn't booty like bootylicious?
Yeah, like he was. I don't think he was into it. So
he was pirating booty.
Yeah, he was like
booty.
Yeah. So those are some of the ones right off the bat that I can share with that. Okay, another.
You've lost your Minnesota. You said Minnesota.
Yeah, Minnesota.
You've lost your Minnesota accent. I was gonna say there it is.
If I talk to you a little bit longer, you might bring it out.
Okay.
Yeah, you might bring it out.
I didn't realize us Midwesterners had an accent, but I guess
any accent. Yeah, it's right there.
Did I say it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did I? Oh, I didn't know. I guess.
Yeah.
Michiganders, buddy.
Michiganders. Yeah, it's a long A. It's always the long A. Okay. Here's a couple last little rapid fires. What's your favorite thing about your business, and what's your least favorite thing about your business?
My favorite thing about my business is being honored enough to be trusted. Least favorite part of my job is how we treat the dead and the grievers in our society.
That's a good one. All right. And this is the last question I'm scrolling through my little questions, and you hit so many things, and then you gave me so much extra, even more stuff that I'm so glad you talked about that I wouldn't have even known to ask. So it's really rich. I often say on this podcast at the end, I ask everybody this question. I say, I'm not really I don't really like to give advice. I mean, I love giving advice, but I try not to give advice. So what I ask is, do you have any suggestion for anybody who might be suffering right now? So I like to ask a suggestion, any suggestions that you have for someone who might be suffering right now with grief or mourning.
So before I answer that, you give advice through your dancing.
Yes, I guess I do. Yes.
That is your artistic way of expressing. My advice, if you're a griever, be calm with yourself, because it's okay not to be okay, and that anybody who tells you that you're not grieving the right way, they are wrong, and they don't know you. So be kind to yourself. That would be the advice for grievers. For people who are trying to help grievers, for the friends, family, first of all, don't just say, "Call me when you need me," because they won't call you. And the second thing is the old school teacher thing. God gave you one mouth and two ears. You do the math. Listen. They want to tell their story. They don't want to hear you tell their story. Let them tell their story.
That's great. That's a great suggestion, and I completely agree. Benny, Capaul, thank you so much for being on the Gray Maybe podcast. I feel like especially special that you wanted to be on the podcast and you were open to it, because your podcast has been out for a minute, and your podcast was like the top something. How many? I don't. It was like at the top listing of like death podcast or podcasts about grief and death, which was like really cool.
Did not know.
You posted it. Yes, you did. No, it's on your TikTok or something. I saw it somewhere.
Oh, that's probably our producer, because she's wonderful.
Oh, okay. So see, look how humble you were about to be. So humble. You're like, I didn't even know it. I'm like, no,
honestly,
I know you know.
That sounds so fake now, but I honestly did not know.
No,
I'm glad. Our producer.
But it's cool. Like your podcast, people know about it. They talk about it. So again, it's called Let's Talk About Death podcast with Benny and Dr. Nick. It's obviously on Spotify. Yes. It's
on
on Apple,
anything you can.
Google.
And if you don't have any of those, you can literally just put in www.letstalkaboutdeathpodcast.com, and you can actually just listen to all the episodes from there. So
Perfect.
you don't even have to have a platform.
Great. And so look them up. They have IG and TikTok. I'll have all this stuff in the show notes. They have Facebook too. But definitely, and I'm also going to link the nonprofits, obviously, that you're a part of.
Yeah.
And I just can't thank you enough for lending your time and talent and schooling us all and giving us a little bit of insight into the world of funeral homes and someone who deals with death, grief, and mourning on literally a daily basis.
Well, can I give some thank yous out first of all,
Yes,
Melissa?
start slinging them.
This
Yes,
wouldn't
Melissa
exist.
Adelia Calisans.
You rule. I want to thank my families that I've served, because I wouldn't be having this discussion with you if they didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to thank my father, grandfather, great-grandfather for keeping this funeral home alive and this community alive, and keep talking about death alive.
Mm-hmm.
And as always, I just honestly want to thank my twin, Dr. Nick, because I would not be on this discussion, nor I'm sure he is ESPing on this discussion right now anyways. And I'll end with, if you're not talking about death, you're not living.
Amen to that. Thank you so much. I never thought I would say that it was such a treat to talk to a funeral director. But Benny isn't your standard funeral director, and he's definitely not just a funeral director. I think it's easy to forget that people who work in and around death, grief, and mourning are people too, and also have dedicated their time to be in service and provide service to people on what very well could be one of the worst days of their life. People who do the things so many of us wouldn't be able to do, and provide comfort and care day in and day out. Benny grew up in a fourth-generation funeral home. Death, grief, and mourning were normalized. He was immersed in it from a very young age. For those of us who didn't grow up in that environment, I wonder how much differently we would deal with death anxiety, grief, and mourning. Or rather, as Benny stated, I wonder how differently we'd live. I can't thank Benny enough for his expertise and willingness to speak candidly on his experiences. If you're listening to this episode and you're experiencing grief, welcome, and I hope this helps your journey. You're not alone. Just a reminder for anyone who needs to hear it, you don't need to have experienced a giant catastrophic event or a death to experience grief. Know that whatever you're feeling, there are those among us who have probably felt it too. You're not alone. If you're listening and you have someone you love in your life that is grieving, welcome. You are also not alone. We as a society have a long way to go in being able to tolerate and help those closest to us manage grief. I've included a link in the show notes for the do's and don'ts, which I'm going to read here. Don't assign positive meaning to their loss. In our effort to encourage and support the griever, we may try to project the current situation into a better future way too soon. Saying, "Time will heal all things," is not helpful. Prophesizing a future positive meaning on top of the grieving person's crushing and devastating loss tends to minimize the griever's current agony, essentially suggesting that they sweep their pain under the rug while focusing on some potential positive long-term outcome. Stay in the moment with the griever. Follow the grieving person's lead. Be an attentive, active listener. Allow the griever to take the conversation where it needs to go. Make room for plenty of silence. Don't jump in to fill space with unnecessary commentary. Sometimes before a two-way conversation can even begin, the griever just wants someone to sit with, literally or virtually. No questions or words of comfort are needed to fill silence. Presence is often what the griever really needs. On their own, sometimes the grieving person will identify a silver lining or hopeful thought that adds meaning to their loss. This is a normal and often constructive way to cope with grief. Remember, The griever is the only person who can know what this loss means to them. Only the griever can make meaning of their experience. Once they do so, it's appropriate to support them in their newfound hope. Use the name of the lost loved one. While you are comforting the griever, all of their emotions are tied up in the loss of their beloved. Saying their loved one's name out loud is a way of validating the life of that person. Say Anne, not your sister. Say Alan, not your son. Say Stu, not your husband. Don't ever be afraid to mention the person lost. Grievers want to talk. Memories are all that remain after a loss, and talking about the person who died helps to keep them alive in broken hearts. Refrain from platitudes. Refrain from platitudes, religious or otherwise, like, they are in a better place, or time heals all things, or everything happens for a reason. Don't pretend that you know the answer. You don't. No one does. As a person who desires to support a griever, pay attention to what you say. Never say anything that starts with the phrase, at least. Comparing and contrasting your own grief experiences or dreamed up hypothetical ones with the reality of the loss that just happened is missing the mark in several ways. Making your loss the topic of conversation is asking the grieving person to switch their focus and empathize with your grief at a time when the total focus should be on them. Don't say, I know how you feel. You don't. Seems to me describing how something worse could have happened represents a thwarted attempt to say something, no matter how unhelpful. Stay out of your empty word, ill-informed autopilot script. Choose not to go there. Be open to the expression of any emotion. As an active listener, be open to any emotions the griever may express through verbal or nonverbal means. Anger, yelling, silence, rage, disbelief, denial, crying, pacing around the room, shouting, rocking back and forth, wringing hands, clenched fists, avoiding eye contact, needing to be held, avoiding touch, etc. Be observant about what the griever is expressing, overt or subtle, and allow a safe space to be in that moment. Do not in any way tell them not to feel what they are feeling. Remember anniversaries. Try to remember anniversaries such as the birthday of the person who died and the anniversary of the date of their death. Sending a card or a text will let the griever know that you are remembering too, reminding them that they are not alone. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you were able to find something relatable in today's episode. If you'd like to show your support for this podcast, consider making a donation on Spotify. It would also be very helpful if you could rate, share, comment, and subscribe. If you'd like to contact the podcast, please email greymaybestories@gmail.com, greymaybestories@gmail.com. Thank you to everyone who helped make this Grey Maybe podcast happen. Producer and editor, Roderick Barge. Cover photo by Jose Perez. Music licensed by Pixabay. Special counsel, Jada Ellingham and Roderick Barge. Special shout out to supporter, Patty Olgan. Until next time, bye for now.